Have you ever stopped to think about how people survived the heat, the cold, and food shortages before refrigerators were invented? Imagine, just for a moment, a time when there was no electricity, no machines to keep food fresh, and the only way to make meat last for months was through ancestral knowledge and a deep connection with nature. Among the people who mastered this art were the Vikings, seafarers, warriors, and explorers of the medieval age. They endured brutal winters, long journeys aboard their drakkars, and daily struggles to ensure their families and armies had enough to eat. But how did they manage to preserve meat for months without relying on any technology we now consider essential? In this video, we're going to dive into the clever techniques the Vikings used to keep their meat from spoiling. From harnessing fire and smoke to using sea salt and underground caves, these methods were so effective that they shaped culinary and trade traditions for centuries. Get ready for a journey through history, where the science of preservation blends with culture, survival, and adventure. We'll uncover not just the how, but the why behind these techniques, and why they were vital to the Vikings' expansion and endurance. And by the end, you might just realize that some of these ancient solutions still play a role in our lives today, even if we don't always notice them. To understand why the Vikings needed to preserve meat for such long periods, we first need to look at their environment and way of life. Imagine living in regions where winter could be brutal and drawn out, with freezing temperatures lasting up to half the year. During that time, there were no fresh crops, no stock markets. Survival depended entirely on carefully stored reserves. The Viking diet revolved around meat, fish, dairy, and grains, but meat was a central pillar for maintaining strength and energy. Hunting wild animals and raising cattle, pigs, and sheep were daily activities that provided fresh food, but only for a short while. Without preservation methods, fresh meat would spoil quickly, especially during the warmer months or on long sea voyages. And the Vikings weren't just farmers. They were explorers who sailed vast distances in their iconic drakkars, facing unpredictable seas and fierce storms. On these expeditions, they carried supplies that had to last for weeks or even months, often without access to fresh food. Preserved meat wasn't a luxury. It was a matter of survival, often the difference between life and death. Without modern technology, they had to rely on traditional methods, passed down through generations, to keep meat from rotting. The task was enormous. Preserve enough food to survive the winter, feed entire communities, and fuel warriors during their campaigns. This reality created an urgent need for effective preservation techniques. It wasn't just about storing food. It was about ensuring the continuation of life, culture, and the Viking expansion throughout Northern Europe. With this need in mind, they began to experiment, refine, and eventually master natural methods that used air, fire, salt, and even the cold itself to turn perishable meat into safe, long-lasting nourishment. And with the urgent need to preserve meat for long periods, the Vikings turned to methods that relied on natural resources like air and fire to stop the growth of bacteria and fungi that cause decay. One of the oldest and most effective techniques was air drying. This process involved exposing fresh meat to steady currents of cold, dry air, which pulled moisture from the tissues, creating an environment hostile to the microorganisms that cause spoilage. To do this, they built special structures, often raised sheds, designed to let wind circulate freely around the meat hanging from wooden hooks or poles. These structures were protected from rain and direct sunlight, but allowed for plenty of ventilation, creating the perfect setting for drying. Alongside drying, another technique that combined heat with a natural antibacterial agent was smoking. In Viking villages, there were small smokehouses called eldis, simple huts where meat was hung to absorb smoke from the slow burning of specific woods, like birch and alder. The smoke didn't just dry the meat. It also infused it with chemical compounds that helped prevent the growth of harmful microorganisms. Controlling the heat was crucial. The smoke had to be steady but not too hot, as excessive heat could cook or burn the meat. This process could take several days, during which the meat would develop a distinct smoky flavor, one still appreciated in parts of the Nordic region today. In addition, The smoke formed a protective outer layer on the meat's surface, acting as a natural barrier against insects and bacteria. Though simple in principle, these two techniques were built on a foundation of deep empirical knowledge. The Vikings knew the best time to dry meat, usually in autumn when the air was cold, dry, and clean, and selected the right types of wood that wouldn't negatively affect the flavor. More than just preserving food, these techniques gave the meat a unique taste and texture, turning it into more than sustenance. It became part of everyday life and culture. By combining drying and smoking, the Vikings could store meat for months, even through the heat of spring and summer. However, beyond air and fire, there was another vital ingredient in preservation: salt. But before we dive into that, it's important to understand that salt wasn't readily available to the Vikings. Because of that, its use was both strategic and highly valued, as we'll explore next. While air and fire played a big role in preserving meat, there was one ingredient the Vikings valued almost like gold: salt. Sea salt was a true treasure for these people, especially in coastal areas where it could be harvested through the evaporation of seawater or gathered from natural deposits. Unlike drying and smoking, salting required a precious and limited resource, making its use highly strategic. The salting technique relied on two main methods: dry curing and brine curing. In dry curing, chunks of meat were rubbed directly with coarse salt and stored in barrels or wooden containers, where the salt would draw out moisture and create an environment hostile to bacteria and other agents of decay. In brine curing, the meat was submerged in a concentrated solution of salt and water, which penetrated the tissue, preserving and flavoring it at the same time. This method was especially useful for preserving pork, mutton, and fish, staples in the Viking diet that needed to be available year-round, even during the harshest winter months. Salt had the power to extend the shelf life of meat for months, making it one of the most reliable ways to store food for long journeys or for use at home. Beyond its preserving abilities, salting also gave meat a distinct flavor that eventually became part of traditional Viking cuisine. Salted meats could be rehydrated or cooked, ensuring they stayed palatable and nutritious even after long periods of storage. However, salt wasn't abundant everywhere. In inland parts of Scandinavia, where access to the sea was limited, salt was a valuable commodity, often traded and, in some cases, even used as currency. This scarcity forced the Vikings to adapt, combining techniques based on what was available. They used salting when salt was accessible and leaned more heavily on smoking and drying in other situations. The importance of salt also shaped Viking trade routes, as they sought not just gold and slaves, but essential resources like salt to secure food independence and support their expeditions. With this secret weapon against spoilage, the Vikings raised food storage to a strategic and vital aspect of their survival. But salt wasn't their only ally. The relentless cold of the north also played a major role in preservation, and the Vikings knew exactly how to harness it. In the next chapter, we'll explore how climate and underground storage chambers complemented these methods, extending the shelf life of meat even further. In addition to techniques involving fire, air, and salt, the Vikings had another powerful ally gifted by nature: the cold of the north. The harsh climate of the Scandinavian regions, especially during the long winter, acted as a natural refrigerator, allowing meat to be preserved for months, as long as the environment was used wisely. To take advantage of this, the Vikings used smart strategies to store meat in places where temperatures stayed low and stable throughout the year. One such method was the use of underground chambers, pits dug into the earth or stone-built structures that serve as storage spaces for food. These areas maintained a cool, constant temperature, protecting meat from heat fluctuations and humidity, both of which speed up spoilage. To improve insulation, they used natural materials like straw, moss, and peat to cover and surround the food, adding an extra barrier against warmth and shielding it from contact with damp soil. In some cases, during winter, meat was buried under layers of snow and ice, which acted as a natural freezer, keeping it frozen and intact for extended periods. However, relying on natural cold wasn't always easy or reliable. In years with milder winters, or during seasonal transitions, temperatures could rise, making preservation more difficult. That's why the Vikings didn't depend solely on the cold. They combined this climatic advantage with drying, smoking, and salting techniques. These integrated strategies ensured that even in less frigid regions or during the warmer months of spring and summer, meat could still be safely stored. This ability to adapt to their environment and use nature's resources intelligently was key to Viking survival. It allowed them not only to endure times of scarcity, but also to travel and expand their territories with dependable food supplies. The next technique we'll explore highlights one of the greatest Viking legacies: the preservation of dried fish, especially the iconic stockfish, which became a valuable trade commodity and a symbol of their expertise in food preservation. Among the many ways the Vikings preserved food, they stood out especially in fish preservation. And one of their most impressive techniques was the production of stockfish. Stockfish is a dried fish, usually cod, that can last for years without refrigeration. The process begins with catching cod in the cold waters off the coast of Norway, where the dry climate and constant wind create perfect conditions for natural drying. Unlike salting, stockfish is made without adding any salt, relying entirely on the wind and cold to remove moisture from the fish. After being cleaned and gutted, the fish is hung on large wooden racks called gel, usually built near the coast and fully exposed to the sea breeze. There, the fish remains for weeks, sometimes even months, slowly drying in the open air. The result is a lightweight, highly durable food with a firm, almost wood-like texture, hence the name stock, meaning log or stick fish. This technique allowed the Vikings to store and transport large quantities of fish without spoilage, making it essential for long sea voyages, trade, and feeding their communities. But stockfish wasn't just practical. It became a valuable commodity, exported to various parts of Europe, especially regions where the climate didn't support fresh meat or fish. This trade helped strengthen the Viking economy and expand their cultural and economic influence. On Viking ships, stockfish was a staple of the daily rations, providing essential protein and energy to sailors and warriors. Its light weight and compact size made it easy to store, allowing more supplies to be carried on board. Beyond practicality, stockfish was also versatile in the kitchen. To make the dried fish edible, it had to be rehydrated, usually by soaking in cold water for several days. Once softened, it could be cooked, roasted, or prepared in a variety of ways, offering both flavor and nutrition. This method of fish preservation is one of the oldest in the world, and it's still used today in Nordic countries, a lasting legacy of Viking ingenuity. With meat and fish properly preserved, the Vikings now faced another challenge: making sure these foods remain protected during transport and storage in their settlements. Let's now explore how they organized their food stocks to keep supplies safe and in good condition. Preserving meat was only part of the challenge. For the Vikings, ensuring that food maintained its quality during travel and storage in their settlements was just as essential. After all, preservation means little if the food gets contaminated or spoils due to carelessness. To solve this, they used a variety of containers and methods to protect meat from the elements, insects, and moisture. Wooden barrels, tough leather sacks, and ceramic jars were the main vessels used to store salted or smoked meat. These materials help keep the food dry and shielded while also making it easier to transport. On Viking ships, where space was limited and conditions could be harsh, the organization of meat supplies was meticulous. Preserved meat was kept in compartments protected from seawater and direct sunlight. Airflow was still important to prevent mold and bad odors, and the Vikings knew how to arrange their food to maximize natural ventilation. Additionally, the most sensitive items were stored in the cooler parts of the ship, using the areas near the hull where the cold seawater helped keep temperatures low. This level of care was vital during long voyages, where the success of the journey often depended on the condition of the supplies. In their settlements, the Vikings built specialized storage facilities, often underground or partially buried, to hold large quantities of preserved meat and fish. These spaces were dark, dry, and cool, the ideal conditions for avoiding bacteria and pests. The combination of these transport and storage methods meant that meat could be consumed months later, during the harsh winter or in times of scarcity, while remaining safe and nutritious. This efficient organization not only ensured daily survival, but also strengthened the Vikings' ability to explore new lands and maintain settlements far from home. They could carry reliable food supplies with them, supporting both their expansion and endurance. In this way, the art of preserving and transporting meat was directly tied to the success of Viking culture, allowing them to be both fearless warriors and savvy traders. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can discover this incredible story.